There's a very particular kind of sadness in knocking on a door no one opens anymore. We do it with our children, with friends, with former partners, even with people who stopped caring about our lives long ago. We think that insisting is a form of love, but in reality, it's a form of self-abandonment. Seeking approval where there's no longer anyone listening is handing someone else the key to your peace. And the hardest part is that the more we do it, the more we reinforce the idea that without that recognition, we're worth less. I remember a woman who told me she sent her adult son messages every day, even though he rarely replied. She said she did it so he won't think I've forgotten him. But deep down, what she feared was being forgotten herself. I asked what would happen if she stopped writing for a week. She fell silent. Then she said, "I'd feel like I disappeared." That silence revealed something profound. She had confused presence with insistence. When you seek approval where there's none, you drift away from your own center. And Stoicism teaches precisely the opposite, to return to the center, even if the world doesn't acknowledge it. We've already seen that comparing and justifying yourself are ways of wasting energy. Seeking approval is another. Epictetus said that the wise person never places their value in someone else's hands, not because they don't care about others, but because they know other people's opinions are beyond their control. When your peace depends on a reply, a call, or a gesture, you give away your power. Emotional freedom begins when you stop begging for affection and start giving it where it's reciprocated. The problem isn't wanting to be loved. That's human. The problem is insisting where love no longer flows. That stubbornness often comes from the fear of accepting loss. We think letting go means giving up on love. But in truth, it's rescuing it from where it no longer grows. Relationships that hurt aren't healed by more effort, but by more distance. And distance, when taken calmly, isn't coldness. It's self-respect. A simple practice is to ask yourself, where am I seeking to be seen from? If it's from need, you'll suffer. If it's from wholeness, you'll choose your connections more wisely. You don't need everyone's approval, you only need coherence with yourself. When you understand that, rejection stops hurting so much because it's no longer a threat to your worth. It's just a sign that it wasn't your place. Often, when we stop seeking approval, a feeling of emptiness appears. That's natural. You're no longer feeding on what once sustained you, even if it was harmful. But in that silence, something new opens up. The chance to see yourself without others' reflection. That's where true self-esteem begins, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or attention, but on knowing you're at peace with yourself, even if no one's watching. From here, another kind of attachment often appears, one that seems harmless but weighs just as much: attachment to things. Because when we stop receiving attention, we often try to fill the void by accumulating objects, memories, or just-in-case items. And that, too, ages the soul. There's a very particular kind of sadness in knocking on a door no one opens anymore. We do it with our children, with friends, with former partners, even with people who stopped caring about our lives long ago. We think that insisting is a form of love, but in reality, it's a form of self-abandonment. Seeking approval where there's no longer anyone listening is handing someone else the key to your peace. And the hardest part is that the more we do it, the more we reinforce the idea that without that recognition, we're worth less. I remember a woman who told me she sent her adult son messages every day, even though he rarely replied. She said she did it so he won't think I've forgotten him. But deep down, what she feared was being forgotten herself. I asked what would happen if she stopped writing for a week. She fell silent. Then she said, "I'd feel like I disappeared." That silence revealed something profound. She had confused presence with insistence. When you seek approval where there's none, you drift away from your own center. And Stoicism teaches precisely the opposite, to return to the center, even if the world doesn't acknowledge it. We've already seen that comparing and justifying yourself are ways of wasting energy. Seeking approval is another. Epictetus said that the wise person never places their value in someone else's hands, not because they don't care about others, but because they know other people's opinions are beyond their control. When your peace depends on a reply, a call, or a gesture, you give away your power. Emotional freedom begins when you stop begging for affection and start giving it where it's reciprocated. The problem isn't wanting to be loved. That's human. The problem is insisting where love no longer flows. That stubbornness often comes from the fear of accepting loss. We think letting go means giving up on love, but in truth, it's rescuing it from where it no longer grows. Relationships that hurt aren't healed by more effort, but by more distance. And distance, when taken calmly, isn't coldness, it's self-respect. A simple practice is to ask yourself, where am I seeking to be seen from? If it's from need, you'll suffer. If it's from wholeness, you'll choose your connections more wisely. You don't need everyone's approval, you only need coherence with yourself. When you understand that, rejection stops hurting so much because it's no longer a threat to your worth. It's just a sign that it wasn't your place. Often, when we stop seeking approval, a feeling of emptiness appears. That's natural. You're no longer feeding on what once sustained you, even if it was harmful. But in that silence, something new opens up. The chance to see yourself without others' reflection. That's where true self-esteem begins, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or attention, but on knowing you're at peace with yourself, even if no one's watching. From here, another kind of attachment often appears, one that seems harmless, but weighs just as much: attachment to things. Because when we stop receiving attention, we often try to fill the void by accumulating objects, memories, or just-in-case items. And that, too, ages the soul. Every object kept just in case is an unfinished conversation with the past. Behind every box, every piece of clothing you no longer wear, every piece of furniture that gets in the way, there's a fragment of a story you haven't fully let go of. Accumulating isn't always about material need. It's often about emotional fear, fear of having nothing, fear of forgetting, fear of never having again. But that invisible weight can be felt. The home fills with things, and so does the mind. And when your surroundings are cluttered, life becomes slower, heavier, with no room for anything new. I once met a man who kept stacks of magazines from 30 years ago. He said they were valuable, that one day he'd read them again. But when I asked how many he'd opened in the past year, he laughed. "None," he said. "They just remind me of another time." That's when I realized he wasn't holding on to magazines. He was holding on to versions of himself. He didn't want to lose the man he'd been when he still felt useful. And that happens to many of us. We keep things because we're afraid of forgetting who we were. But we're not those things. We're the awareness that can choose to let them go. In the previous chapters, we saw that seeking approval and comparison are also forms of attachment. Here, attachment becomes tangible. The Stoics spoke of detachment as freedom, not because they denied the value of material things, but because they understood that clinging to what has already completed its cycle only creates suffering. The same applies to objects. If you don't release them, they turn into burdens. You don't have to get rid of everything, but you do need to let go of what no longer serves a real or healthy emotional purpose. Your home should breathe with you. It shouldn't be a museum of who you used to be. Every object carries energy, and keeping your spaces clear isn't just about aesthetics. It's an act of emotional hygiene. When you choose to keep only what you use, what you love, or what truly has meaning, your environment shifts. You feel lighter, clearer, and your mind welcomes that new air because every item you release is one less thought to carry. There's a deep connection between detachment and inner peace. Letting go of an old garment might seem trivial, but if you do it consciously, You're practicing the same principle that allows you to release resentment or guilt. The exercise is the same. Acknowledge that something served you, thank it, and let it go. That too is Stoic wisdom. It honors what was within your control and accepts, with serenity, what no longer is. You might try something simple. Choose one object each day and ask yourself what role it plays in your life now. If it no longer has one, set it free. The emptiness that remains isn't a loss, it's available space. And in maturity, learning to create space matters more than filling it. Only in emptiness can the new, the unexpected, and what your soul still longs to experience find room to enter. That said, there's another kind of space that also needs clearing. The places where you move, the environments that no longer do you good. I'm not just talking about your home, but about those places you keep showing up to out of habit, even when you no longer feel welcome. Because we don't just accumulate things, we also accumulate presences that no longer nourish us. There's a vast difference between being accepted and being tolerated. When someone accepts you, they look at you with respect, even if they don't share your views. When someone tolerates you, they simply put up with you because they have no choice. And yet, many older people get used to that, to being in places where they're no longer heard, where they're interrupted, where their presence feels like a polite inconvenience. The worst part is that you start to believe it's normal, that you should settle for a corner while everyone else keeps living. But staying where you're only tolerated is a slow way to disappear. I've met people who, out of fear of being alone, keep going to gatherings where no one's waiting for them, to lunches where no one asks how they're doing, to groups where their words carry no weight. I go because it's good to get out, they say. But going out doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just distracts from the emptiness. Stoicism teaches that it's unwise to expose yourself to environments that disturb your inner peace. Not every social interaction is companionship. Being where you aren't valued doesn't strengthen you, it wears you down. In the previous chapters, we saw how letting go of things frees energy. The same applies to spaces. Peace isn't protected only at home, it's also protected in the places you choose to inhabit. Seneca said, "It's not about how many friends you have, but about being with those before whom you can be yourself without pretending." Aging with dignity also means choosing carefully where to place your body and your soul. It can hurt at first to admit that certain places no longer belong to you. Maybe they once brought joy, but now they leave you empty. Maybe they once made you feel included, and now they just make you feel old. But staying there out of habit is like wearing clothes that no longer fit. It ends up making everyone uncomfortable. Accepting that something has changed isn't surrender, it's emotional maturity. Every stage of life needs new settings, new people, and new energies that support your growth. This isn't about isolating yourself, it's about being selective. Choose spaces where you feel calm, where your voice matters, where silence isn't uncomfortable. Those places exist, though they're rarely the loudest ones. Sometimes they're found in a walk, a quiet cafe, or a conversation with someone who truly listens. And when you can't find them outside, create them within. A corner of the soul where there's no judgment or competition, only presence. Here's a simple question that can guide you. How do I feel when I leave this place? If you come back lighter, it belongs to your present. If you come back drained or smaller, it belongs to your past. The body never lies. It knows where it's respected and where it's merely used as decoration. From this awareness arises another kind of environment that can be just as harmful. Those where people only talk about the past, places where nostalgia becomes a language and life seems to have stopped. Behind those gatherings full of memories lies a subtle risk for the soul. There are conversations that seem warm, but are actually traps of time. Gatherings where the same stories are told, the same names repeated, and every detail of what will never return is revisited. Sometimes these talks start as a refuge, but end up becoming a prison. Talking only about the past isn't healthy nostalgia, it's resistance to keep living. When the only thing that unites a group is memory, what dies isn't the topic, it's the present. I remember a group of friends who met every Friday. At first, it was a beautiful tradition. But over the years, their conversations turned into a list of "remember when." One of them, the quietest, once said, "I feel like every time I come here, I grow older." And he was right. It wasn't the years. It was the energy trapped in melancholy. The past can be a source of gratitude, but when it becomes a place of residence, it extinguishes curiosity for what's still ahead. In earlier chapters, we saw that there are spaces where growth stops. This is one of the most dangerous because it disguises itself as affection. Stoicism invites us to use the past as a teacher, not as a home. Remembering is good, but living in memories is like trying to breathe air that's already been exhaled. Every new day needs room for its own stories, and if your heart is full of what was, it can't hold what is. The danger of talking only about the past is that the mind begins to believe the best has already happened. And when that happens, faith in the future fades. There's no age limit for having projects, even small ones. Planting something, writing down a thought, learning something new, walking a different path, all of that keeps the flame alive. Old age doesn't begin when the body weakens, but when the soul grows tired of imagining. Some people use memories as comfort, and that's fine, but you also have to know how to leave them behind. Seneca said that memories should serve us for gratitude, not for regret. If a memory leaves you sad, let it rest. If it gives you joy and drives you forward, bring it back. You choose which memories to feed. Not all of them deserve a permanent place at your inner table. Here's a simple practice. The next time you're in a conversation that revolves entirely around the past, shift the tone. Ask something about the present. What excites you today? What are you learning? What would you still like to experience? If the group falls silent, that's a sign. Life needs people who talk about what's yet to come. Surrounding yourself with those who still dream rejuvenates you more than any treatment. From here, we open the door to the final kind of place worth avoiding, the most subtle of all. It's not always external. Sometimes it's a social setting, other times it's an inner state. It's that place where you force a smile so you don't make others uncomfortable, where you pretend to be fine even though the light inside is fading. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul, from pretending for too long, pretending to be happy, pretending to care, pretending that nothing hurts. Over time, that habit becomes a mask that's hard to take off because we start confusing politeness with self-denial. But silencing what you feel so you don't make others uncomfortable is a form of inner exile. There's no age for continuing to act as if everything's fine when it isn't. In maturity, peace isn't built by pretending to be strong, but by allowing yourself to be truthful. I remember a man who told me, "I don't share my sorrows anymore. I don't want to be a burden." And yet, his eyes said everything. Pretending to be okay doesn't protect others. It distances them. Sincerity, on the other hand, creates respect and closeness. Stoicism teaches that what hurts should be understood, not hidden. It's not about complaining, it's about recognizing what's happening without embellishment, because only what's accepted can be transformed. Pretending just delays the chance to heal. We've already learned that there are physical places that drain us, but there are emotional ones too. Pretending to be fine is living in an inner space full of echoes. Your voice is heard, but no one answers. When you get used to that, you start to believe loneliness is inevitable. But what hurts isn't solitude, It's disconnection. Sometimes authenticity leaves you with fewer people, yes, but with more life. And that's always worth it. The fear of showing pain runs deep. Many of us grew up hearing that we have to be strong, not draw pity. But strength without truth becomes rigidity. True strength is being transparent without losing calm. Saying, "I'm not feeling well today," doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And shared humanity is where comfort is born. Pretending to be fine doesn't protect you from judgment. It only robs you of the chance to be truly seen. Sometimes the pretending isn't for others, it's for ourselves. You convince yourself you're okay so you don't have to make changes, face losses, or revisit old wounds. But denial doesn't heal, it only delays. Stoic wisdom doesn't propose denying pain, but coexisting with it without giving up. To recognize it, breathe through it, and keep moving. Because there's no growth without honesty. Being authentic doesn't mean revealing everything, it means not lying to yourself. You can choose who to share your truth with, but you can't keep denying it without paying a heavy price. Serenity is born from that quiet coherence between what you feel and what you show. And when you achieve that, your gaze softens, your body relaxes, and your soul settles back into place. Just as there are physical places that pull you away from yourself, there are also spaces where your truth no longer fits. Don't insist on staying there. Don't force yourself to smile when the light inside is dim. Life is far too short to waste energy maintaining appearances. Better to walk slowly, but with truth. And with that truth at the center, it's time to bring this to a close, to look back at the phrases, actions, and places that we now know drain us and keep only what restores our serenity and sense of purpose. Throughout this reflection, we've explored 3 dimensions that shape how we age: what we say, what we do, and the places we choose. We've seen that there are phrases that, though they seem harmless, take life away from us, actions that tie us to what no longer has meaning, and spaces that drain our energy without us realizing it. Aging with serenity isn't about stopping time, it's about using it with dignity. It's about no longer repeating that we can't, no longer seeking approval, and learning to release everything that has already fulfilled its purpose. Every step toward lightness, in words, in possessions, in relationships, is a step toward inner freedom. Thank you for staying until the end. Sharing this conversation with you means a lot, because every conscious listener sustains this space and makes it possible. There is no wisdom without community, and this shared journey toward inner peace proves that even in maturity, we can keep learning, growing, and rewriting our lives. Your presence, your time, and your words are the heart of this path. My name is Gabriel, and my purpose is to help you protect your peace and your dignity, even when others don't change. That's the essence of everything we do here, to show that serenity doesn't depend on the outside world, but on the way we choose to see it. If this video helped you understand something new about yourself, keep this space in your memory as a reminder that you can always choose differently no matter your age. Write in the comments where you're watching from and share this phrase to seal what we've learned today. My peace doesn't age with the years. Share this with someone who's going through the same process and needs that reminder. Thank you for being part of this community that chooses to live with awareness, self-love, and practical wisdom. Up next, you'll see 2 videos on the screen. Choose one and keep deepening this journey of growth and serenity. Some phrases age faster than the body. Sometimes it's not the years that weigh us down, but the words we tell ourselves every day. I can't anymore. That's not for me. At my age, you don't do that. Without realizing it, we start dressing ourselves in phrases that shrink us, that take up our space, that make us apologize for still being here. Growing old doesn't hurt so much because of the passing years, but because of the way we start convincing ourselves that we no longer have the right to learn, to make mistakes, or to start over. And the most paradoxical part is that when we repeat it often enough, others start believing it too. Many reach maturity with a mix of weariness and clarity. They've loved, raised children, worked, carried burdens, and suddenly the world seems to move faster than they can keep up. Social media, technology, new ideas, everything changes, and a voice inside whispers, "I don't understand anything anymore." But that voice isn't truth, it's fear. Because the truth is, life doesn't end when our roles change, when our children move away, or when the mirror shows wrinkles. What ends is the habit of believing that our worth depends only on what we produce or on who needs us. And there is a deeply Stoic path to aging with dignity, to care for what's within our control, to let go of what's not, and to choose where to spend our remaining energy without guilt or shame. If this is your first time here, my name is Gabriel. I've spent years studying how Stoicism can help us live with serenity, even as our bodies change and our relationships transform. In this space, we seek to recover our inner peace and the dignity of deciding over our own lives without needing others to change. I invite you to subscribe, because here you'll find practical tools and a calm perspective to guide you along the way. Stay until the end, because in the last part, I'll share a reflection that might completely change the way you understand the passing of time. Let's begin. Some people, without realizing it, turn their age into their main introduction. "I'm in my 60s, they say, before telling you anything else. As if those years were either a kind of permission to speak or a warning that not much should be expected. When we keep repeating our age, we turn it into a limit, a reminder of what we believe we can no longer do. But age doesn't define the value of our words, our ability to learn, or the dignity with which we can continue to grow. What truly ages isn't the body, but the belief that the passing years are a wall. I remember a woman I met in a workshop about the passage of time. Every time she shared something, she began with the same phrase, "At my age, people don't change." She said it kindly, but with resignation too. One day I asked her what would happen if she stopped saying it, just out of curiosity. She smiled, and after a few seconds of silence, she said, "Then I'd have to try something." That was the first time I heard her talk about her desires instead of her limits. And that's when I realized that sometimes what keeps us from moving forward isn't our age, but the story we keep telling ourselves to justify not trying anymore. From a Stoic point of view, what matters isn't the number we carry, but how we use each day. Epictetus said that no one is too old to start caring for their mind, because the mind doesn't age, it just gets used to things. As long as we stay curious and open to learning, we remain young in the ways that truly matter. The opposite of growing old isn't being young, it's being alive inside, and that's not measured in years, but in the capacity to be surprised, to question ourselves, to hear something new without feeling threatened. So far, we've seen that the problem isn't getting older, but the story we build around our years. When you repeat your age constantly, you create a frame that shapes how others see you and how you see yourself. It's different to say, "I'm 60," than to say, "I'm at a stage where I understand what truly matters." The first reduces you to a number. The second opens you to perspective. That's why the invitation is to stop using age as either an excuse or a shield. Every time you feel tempted to mention it to justify something, pause and ask yourself, do I really need to explain this because of my years or because of fear? Sometimes that constant repetition hides a need for recognition, for others to value your effort, your experience, or your story. But there's no need to remind them all the time. Those who have lived with integrity don't need to justify their existence. Respect comes when you stop asking for permission to be. And if those around you forget who you once were, it doesn't matter. The essential thing is, that you don't forget who you are now. Age isn't defended with words, but with presence. Accepting the passage of time doesn't mean mentioning it in every conversation. It means living it naturally. Like a flower that doesn't announce how many days it has left, it simply blooms. There's a deep elegance in someone who doesn't make their age a topic, but their life a continuous work of art. The silence around age, when it comes from peace, isn't denial, it's wisdom. With that said, let's move on to another phrase that seems harmless but hides a quiet surrender to the present, one that drains energy and hope without us even noticing. That phrase often slips out without thinking, like a sigh that mixes fatigue with surrender. "I don't have time anymore" sounds real, but deep down, it's a way of saying, "I no longer believe it's worth trying." The strange thing is, the more we repeat it, the more we convince ourselves that life owes us something, as if the clock had turned against us. But time doesn't run out, it simply changes shape, and the way you look at it determines whether it becomes an enemy or an ally. The problem isn't the calendar, it's your relationship with it. Someone at 70 can live with more vitality than someone at 40. Not because their body is stronger, but because their mind hasn't given up. Saying, "I don't have time anymore," is a sentence that kills the present. The Stoics insisted that the only thing we truly possess is the moment we're living. Everything else is memory or projection. If you think about the days ahead, you feel fear. If you think about the ones behind, you feel nostalgia. But when you focus on the day in your hands, you realize there's always something to do, to give, to understand more deeply. We've already seen that it's not age that confines us, but the words we use to limit ourselves. In the same way, believing that time has run out steals your ability to act in the present. Marcus Aurelius said that a person's life is as long as their capacity to make use of the moment. It doesn't matter if you have 10 years or 10 days left, what you do with them is what makes them eternal or insignificant. Every time you postpone a desire using time as an excuse, you're giving away your power. Some people use the lack of time as a polite way to avoid risk. It's easier to say, "I don't have time anymore," than to admit, "I'm afraid to start." But when you stop moving, life stops too. Sometimes all it takes is changing the phrase. Instead of saying, "I don't have time anymore," say, "I'm going to make good use of the time I have." That simple shift changes your energy when you wake up, clears your mind, and reminds you that you don't need a new life, just clearer attention to the one you already have. Think for a moment about the projects you once dreamed of but put on hold, not because they were impossible, but because you convinced yourself it was too late. What would happen if you looked at them again with today's eyes? Maybe you discover that now you have more calm, more wisdom, and less need to prove anything. That's what time gives. Perspective. Maybe you can't run like before, but you can better understand the meaning of the race. Maybe you can't travel as much, but you can inhabit your home with a presence you never knew before. The Stoics taught not to fear what lies beyond our control, and the passage of time is exactly that. You can't stop it, but you can decide how to live it. If each morning you choose one thing that gives your day meaning, that day becomes a whole life. And in the end, that's all that really matters, not how many years you lived, but how many days you were truly awake within them. From here, it makes sense to talk about another very common phrase that seems humble, but is actually a disguised form of surrender, one that makes many give up their voice, their inner authority, and their hard-earned wisdom to those who believe they know more simply because they're young. That phrase sounds kind, even wise. It seems like the humble acknowledgement of one generation making way for another. But in reality, it's often a quiet surrender of one's own judgment. When you say, "My kids know more than I do," what you're really saying, without realizing it, is, "I no longer trust my own judgment." And with that, an inner light starts to fade. Of course, younger generations bring different kinds of knowledge, new tools, and new ways of understanding the world, but that doesn't mean your experience has lost its value. Wisdom isn't measured by how much information you handle, but by the clarity with which you interpret life. I know a man who was for years the center of his family. He made decisions, solved problems, guided with calm. But when his children grew up and became more tech-savvy, he started to feel left behind. Every time there was a discussion, he'd fall silent and say, "You guys know more than I do." Until one day, one of them corrected him. "Dad, we don't know more. We just know differently." That sentence disarmed him. He realized he had confused modernity with wisdom, and that respect isn't lost when the world changes. It's lost when you stop taking part in it. In the previous sections, we learned that the words you use to define yourself can be traps. The same applies here. Misunderstood humility turns into submission, and submission eventually erodes dignity. Saying that your kids know more may sound loving, but it often hides a fear of seeming outdated or being judged. What's healthy is to recognize that they handle different tools, while you possess an understanding of life that can only come from experience. Your kids might know how to use a phone better, but you know when a conversation needs silence. And that kind of wisdom can't be learned online. Stoicism teaches us to distinguish between what we can and cannot control. You can't control the pace of the times or your children's opinions, but you can control how you position yourself before them. If you place yourself as someone who must always learn from others, even from those who once learned from you, you empty yourself. But if you place yourself as someone who keeps learning without losing your center, you remain dignified and present. The key is not confusing openness with surrender. Perhaps this is one of the hardest tests of maturity, to keep listening without feeling lesser. Accepting that your children can teach you new things isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of growth. What's dangerous is giving yourself over to them completely, believing their way of seeing the world cancels out your own. When that happens, the relationship becomes unbalanced because there's no longer dialogue, only obedience. And a relationship without dialogue isn't love, it's emotional dependence disguised as respect. Stoic philosophy encourages us to maintain our own judgment even when the world disagrees. Seneca said that the wise listen to everyone but follow their own path. If your children think differently, that's fine. What matters is that you don't become an echo of their ideas. They also need to see you firm, consistent, guided by an inner compass that doesn't trade itself for approval. In the end, the most powerful example you can leave behind isn't that of someone who gave in, but of someone who remained true to themselves with serenity. So every time you're about to say, "they know more," remember that knowledge doesn't erase wisdom. Youth learns quickly, but maturity understands deeply. And understanding deeply is what sustains life when everything else changes. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave your name and the country you're watching from in the comments. I read every message carefully because this space is built with your words and your stories. Tell me also which phrase you think most limits people of your generation. It might appear in a future video. That said, let's return to the theme that brought us here. We've seen how certain phrases make us age before our time. Now let's open the door to the actions that, without realizing it, slowly dim our joy for living. There comes a point in life when the body stops fully obeying. New aches appear, the skin changes, the mirror no longer reflects the same image. And then, without realizing it, we start looking at others, searching for differences, who's aged better, who's gained less weight, who still has the same energy as before. But comparison doesn't motivate, it drains you. Comparing your body to someone else's or to the one you had 20 years ago is like punishing a tree for having grown. Every wrinkle, every mark, every bit of slowness has a story. They're not signs of decay, they're traces of existence. I remember a woman who, in every conversation, spoke about her body with shame. She said she could no longer wear her old clothes, that she felt invisible, that she couldn't stand seeing herself in photos. I asked if she had ever thanked her body for everything it had done for her. She went silent. She said she'd never thought of it that way, because aging forces us to change our relationship with the body, from demanding to listening, from controlling to accompanying. When you learn to look at yourself with compassion, age stops being a sentence and becomes a different kind of beauty, calmer and more real. Up to this point, we've understood that the phrases we repeat can age the soul. Now we can see that comparisons are another form of the same thing. Every time you look at your body with disdain, you deny the story that brought you here. Stoicism teaches that what's beyond our control must be accepted with serenity, and what is within our control must be cared for with consistency. You can't control how your skin ages, but you can decide how you inhabit it. If you treat it kindly, the reflection won't hurt as much. There's a common trap at this stage, believing that taking care of yourself is the same as chasing youth. But they're very different things. Taking care of yourself is an act of self-love. Chasing youth is a lost battle against time. Eating well, sleeping enough, moving your body, these are acts of respect, not vanity. Because the body you have now is the only vehicle you have left to keep living with dignity. Denying it or punishing it only takes you farther from the peace you're searching for. A simple practice is to replace criticism with gratitude. In front of the mirror, instead of thinking about what's missing, say, "Thank you for carrying me this far." That small gesture may seem insignificant, but it heals something inside. The Stoics spoke of the body as the instrument of the soul. It's not about perfection. It's about being ready to do good, to act with purpose, to serve the mind that lives within it. Comparison steals your presence. Acceptance gives you back your freedom. The body isn't meant to please others. It's meant to allow you to live in peace with yourself. When you understand that, the pressure fades and calm begins. You may never have the same figure again, but you can have a serenity you've never known before. And that peace, when it shows on your face, is worth more than any youth. From this understanding, we can move to another behavior that often appears when we feel physically or emotionally unworthy: the desperate search for approval. That habit of insisting where there's no reciprocity is another kind of loss, one more painful than any wrinkle. Let's see how it works and how to let it go.